Parliamentary Secretary, Mr. Omar Alghabra. They were deeply moved by what they heard in these meetings. I know families and Canadians have a lot of questions, and I can assure you that we will not rest until we get to the bottom of this. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a national tragedy. In a way, we all know the victims of this crash. The colleague that made you laugh on Monday mornings, the professor who helped you become the person you are today, the friend you could always count on, the parent you admired, the child you watched grow up. These people help us make who we are. Losing them like this unexpectedly and inexplicably is devastating for each and every Canadian. It is a tremendous loss, not only for their families, but for the entire country. In the days since the crash, there has been an outpouring of support from Canadians across the country. Vigils were held, stories were shared, messages of love and support were sent. I hope the families can find some comfort in knowing that the entire country is grieving with them during this extraordinarily difficult time. Je tenais également à m'adresser aux Canadiens et aux Canadiennes aujourd'hui pour faire une mise à jour sur la situation qui continue d'évoluer. Depuis mercredi,
Since Wednesday, our government has worked tirelessly to obtain answers to our questions and particularly to support families that are grieving.
To that end, I have a few updates to share with Canadians tonight. First, the Prime Minister of Canada has asked the clerk of the Privy Council to set up an emergency task force of senior officials to ensure that the families and loved ones of the victims have the support that they need. Second, our government will be setting up a dedicated process to address any visa issues for those affected by the crash. It goes without saying that these extraordinary circumstances, and our government is mobilizing as quickly as possible to provide more support to families, many of whom are currently separated from their loved ones. Our priority at this time is providing support to the affected families. They need us, and we are looking at all possible options to do this. The Prime Minister has also mandated his Parliamentary Secretary, Omar Alghabra, to work directly with the families as they navigate this very, very difficult time. As far as the investigation is concerned, we repeat our call for a full and thorough investigation. We have a team of officials from Global Affairs Canada and the Transportation Safety Board in place in Ankara, in Turkey. To date, the Iranians have issued 2 visas, and we expect the other visas will be granted soon so we can begin providing consular services, help with the identification of the victims, and obviously participate in the investigation. Finally, the Prime Minister and I have spoken with premiers as well as opposition leaders over the past few days. All Canadians should know that we stand united in this difficult time. This, like I said before, is nothing short of a national tragedy, and all levels of governments are working together to support families and their loved ones, and obviously the loved ones of the victims, to ensure that all the questions that they may have would be answered. The Prime Minister also just concluded the 5th meeting of the Incident Response Group. He will also be speaking with Prime Minister Abe of Japan later this evening. Canada has established the International Coordination and Response Group for families of the victims of Flight 752. This group brings together representatives of Ukraine, Sweden, Afghanistan, and the United Kingdom, who are all grieving and also searching for answers. Earlier today, I led the first call with our partners. All participating countries reaffirmed the need for a full and transparent investigation into the causes of the fatal crash. Au cours des prochains jours, le Premier
In
ministre
coming days, the Prime Minister
du Canada
and Canada's Vice Prime Minister will participate in commemorative events and will meet with the families of victims across the country. The Prime Minister and myself will continue also to meet with several international leaders and with our partners. Conversations will continue as long as until we receive answers to our questions, rather.
As the Prime Minister said yesterday, Canada's objective throughout this process are very, very clear. Closure, transparency, accountability, and justice. Canadians can rest assured that our government will continue to do everything it can to achieve those objectives. Comme le Premier ministre l'a dit hier,
as the Prime Minister said yesterday, Canada's objectives are very clear in this affair. We want light to be shed in this file in a spirit of transparency and justice, and we want the families, obviously, to find comfort.
So one important thing I would like to add before I conclude is that the number of Canadian victims now stand at 57. Une mise à jour importante avant de prendre vos questions.
Before I take your questions, I'd like to announce that the names of the Canadian victims is now, or the number rather, is now 57, and I'd be very happy to answer your questions.
We're going to start with Mia Rabson in the Canadian Press, and then we're going to go over to Marc Cabou of Radio-Canada.
Can you maybe explain that last number, the number of victims, and is it still 138 people that were still heading to Canada?
Yeah, what you saw is that this is a very fluid situation. We said that from the get-go in terms of identifying the number of victims, which would be Canadians on board. Based on the most recent information we have received, we were able to establish that the number of Canadian victims was not 63, but 57. This is based on additional information we had about birth date and comparing the travel documents that people were traveling on when they boarded the flight.
Still 138 people were traveling to Canada?
That's the number. That number has not changed to the best of my knowledge, but the number of Canadian victims have gone from 63 to 57.
And also, do you have any concerns about the reports that the site has been cleared, that it's not secure, that maybe there's scavengers on the site, and if that's happening, what Canada might be able to actually do when you get there?
Well, obviously, I'm concerned. Like all Canadians, we're looking at the image that are coming, and the first thing that we need to do, and I called upon the Iranian government, is to issue those visas. We have our rapid response team, which is currently based in Ankara. This is a team of 10 people from Global Affairs. We have 2 officials from the Transport Safety Board of Canada, which are also on their way to Ankara. We need visas for these people to get on the ground, to have eyes on the ground and boots on the ground to be able to provide the assistance and be able to provide, obviously, consular services to Canadians. To date, as we speak, the latest information I got is that 2 visas have been issued to our team. So there remain 10 visas that we want to, that we need, obviously, for our people to move into Tehran. And I've been calling the Foreign Minister of Turkey today to seek his assistance as well to make sure that the Iranian embassy in Ankara would be issuing the visas as quickly as possible, because we all know that in circumstances like the one we're facing, time is of the essence. Every hours matter, and we are pursuing that vigorously with all the authorities and partners around the world.
Marc Godbout, Radio-Canada, and then we'll go Brian Tumulty, National Post.
Allez-y, monsieur.
Go ahead, sir. Minister Champagne, for the past 24 hours, have you had additional information about the investigation that was communicated to the Canadian government? And at this very time, can you tell us exactly what is happening in terms of access
auquel pourrait avoir droit le BST en Iran
Could TSB have access
à l'heure où on se parle,
to Iran?
est-il suffisant?
And are they having sufficient access? Obviously, there is a team, a Ukrainian team, that is on site. There are roughly 50 Ukrainian officials in Tehran on the site, and discussions are unfolding with authorities in Iran. And that is why, under the OIC protocol, Canada can and must participate in the investigation, and that is why we created this international coordination group, which represents countries of the victims. We want to speak with one voice, so we have strength. The governments of Sweden, Ukraine, UK, and Canada will be able to speak with one voice, and that is the objective of this group. We want to speak with one voice for the investigation, to have full access to the coalition that was created, and also to be able to communicate with the victims, because bear in mind that the first duty we have is to the families of victims. They have many questions which are legitimate, and we have to answer them. So we created a group like this to allow us to have information, and so we were able to obtain information that is circulating. Those who are on site right now are Ukrainian representatives, and that is why, over the past few hours, with the Prime Minister and the Canadian government, our first priority is to obtain visas, to allow our investigators to go to the site, and to allow Canadian personnel to be on site as well, to offer consular services, and to also identify the victims. The White House update this afternoon said that NATO would have an increased mandate in the region. Did you receive a concrete request during that call? Is Canada in position to say yes? And under what conditions? Most of my discussion with Secretary Pompeo, during this tragic time, like Canada is experiencing, focused mainly on the whole question of the flight crash. We were able to discuss Iraq. We also talked about the mission, and what you saw in the summary was mostly what was said. Obviously, the U.S. President talked about having a greater role in NATO. There was a meeting today in Washington with representatives of NATO and Secretary Pompeo, and we will find out what was discussed during that meeting, and then we'll be able to come back with you with the next steps and actions that Canada will be taking.
Go to Emily Bergeron.
Minister, I'm wondering, the Ukrainians have 45 investigators on the ground in Iran. Why are we only looking to have 2? And I'm also wondering, when our investigators get on the ground, should they get these visas, are you confident they're going to have access to everything they need in terms of the wreckage and the crash site, as well as the data from the black box?
Well, time will tell. I cannot speak for the Iranian government. I think the world is watching the Iranian authorities as to the access they will be providing. As we said, we want a full and complete investigation. That's why the International Coordination and Response Group want to speak with one voice, because not only Canadians want to know in Canada, but you have families across the world, and I would say you have also Iranian families who want to know what really happened on that night. And therefore, we are pushing, obviously, for a more active role for the Canadian investigator, because they have the knowledge, they have the technical know-how to be providing assistance with the black box, with also interpreting what may have happened. So I hope that the government of Iran welcome our offer to provide additional assistance in getting to the truth. Like you just pointed out, obviously it starts with the visas, because until and unless we can have our people physically on the ground at the site, at the meeting, we are obviously not in a position to have all the influence we want. So we have been stressing to the Iranian government to issue these visas as quickly as possible. And tomorrow morning, I will have even more to know, because obviously today that was a holiday, I understand, in Ankara. The Iranian embassy is opening up in a few hours. And we do hope to be able to report to Canadians that all the visas that we have been asking for have been issued.
And what about only the 2 investigators from Canada?
Well, so far, I think under the protocol, if you look at the protocol of the OIC, it says about 1 observer that could be participating. The fact that we are sending 2, I think, is a good sign. And hopefully, as you know, we have to work with the Iranian authorities. My understanding is that they've extended the invitation to 2 individuals from the Transport Safety Board. So we're going to go with that. And if there was a need to supplement in terms of expertise, technical know-how, we have made clear to the Iranian authorities through the coordination group as well, to the Ukrainian government, that Canada stands ready to provide more assistance as the case might be, because we believe that the only thing that the international community now wants is answers. They want the truth, and the way to do that is through a full investigation.
Emily Bergeron.
Monsieur Champagne.
Minister Champagne, good evening. 2 visas granted in 3 days by Iran. Well, Iran seems to be only giving these visas in dribs and drabs. Are they showing signs of openness with this speed? I would say the last time there was a Minister of Foreign Affairs that met with Iranian authorities was roughly a decade ago. So under these circumstances, well, the fact that I was able to meet or discuss things with my Iranian homologue for 10 or 20 minutes, well, I did ask him to issue the visas we needed to send our specialists there. Well, the fact that the Deputy Minister Morgan had discussions with Iranian officials, and when I spoke with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iran, he identified one particular person with whom the Canadian government could work. I also spoke today with the Swiss foreign minister who represents Iranian in Canada. I also spoke with the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Italy who represents people in Iraq. So there's an international coordination to advance this. But since we haven't had diplomatic relations for almost a decade, we do have to put things into place. But diplomacy is more of an art than a science. So what I understood from the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Iran is that there is some openness, and we did discuss things to issue visas, and 2 were already granted. So that gives me some hope that we'll rapidly be able to solve this visa issue. Iran is set to announce tomorrow the cause, in their opinion, of the crash of the flight, and at present, Tehran is refuting the missile theory. What are you expecting to hear tomorrow? In this particular area, you have to hear the information as it comes, and what I can tell you is that this will show that we need a full and thorough investigation, because justice has to be rendered, and Canadians have legitimate concerns, and people need answers. And that's what I was saying when we created this international coordination group. It allows us to speak with one voice, not just Canada. It's Canada, Ukraine, Sweden, UK. We'll be speaking with one single voice. We want an independent and thorough investigation. And obviously, experts can shed light on this, and it's by doing so that we'll be able to show what the real causes were of this crash.
And then CBC.
Sir.
Minister, are you concerned that the U.S. did not give Canada notice in advance of the assassination of General Soleimani? And if so, did you express that or even discuss that when you talked to Secretary of State Pompeo today?
I won't get into the detail of what I discussed specifically with the Secretary. As you know, today our discussion was primarily around what happened with the flight. As you would understand, this is a national tragedy for Canada. So we spent the bulk of our time talking about the downing of the aircraft. We also talk about Iraq. But I would say that we reminded ourselves both that the U.S. presence in Iraq is essential to be able to provide the stability and security that the Iraqi people have wanted to go to prosperity. You know that I've been speaking twice to the Speaker of Parliament in Iraq. I spoke to the Foreign Minister. And in each of these conversations, they reminded me, because the question is the why. Why do we have troops on the ground in the NATO mission or in the coalition, is really because the Iraqi people want to have the democratic and economic reform that they so wish. So we are there to provide security. By providing security, we provide stability and eventually prosperity. So the discussion was around the fact that the U.S. is a key element to make sure that we can protect our force, provide the logistics, and play a positive role, because I think everyone wants de-escalation in the region, and I think Canada can play a positive role in that.
Without repeating what you told my colleague about the need for a transparent investigation, which your government has said repeatedly, when you hear news
and I would say the world, not just Canada.
Fair. When you hear what Iran is saying today, saying it doesn't believe a missile was involved, what does that tell you about whether they're approaching this investigation in good faith?
Well, time will tell, and the world is watching. You know, the statement made by the Prime Minister yesterday about the cause is based on intelligence that we have. And obviously, that's why we want to go to the investigation. We have been clear with them that we want to cooperate, that the world wants to know. But I think that over the course of the next days, you're right, we'll see if they are genuine in their interest to have a full and transparent investigation. There's issue about who's going to look at the black box. We've offered assistance. I think transparency is what the world, the international community is looking for now. And hopefully the government of Iran and the authorities will see that by being transparent, they will provide the certainty and the answers. And I've said to the beginning, it's about the families, not just the Canadian ones, but I suspect that if you're a family in Iran and you have one of your loved one on that plane, you want to know what really happened. So we have been putting out what we believe in to be the cause of this airliner crashing. And obviously now it's going to be for Iran to hopefully take the right path and allow for this complete and full investigation.
And then we're going to go to David Cochrane.
Minister Champagne, you want answers, but how would you describe the cooperative attitude of Iran? I think in the coming hours and days, we'll be able to determine the path that the Iranian government will take in this affair. Obviously, right now, we're looking at visas because that's what will allow us to offer consular services, and it will also allow us to participate in the investigation. So I think in coming hours, we'll be very transparent with Canadians. We'll come back to you regularly with information that we have, and we'll tell you about the discussions we'll be having with our various partners. The Prime Minister will be talking with the Japanese Prime Minister this evening. I'll be speaking with my French counterparts this weekend. So the international coalition is working in the same direction, and I think we want to cooperate in this investigation and shed full light on this, because people want us to really look at the causes, and the world is watching. The world needs answers to these questions. Are you concerned about the cost of the crash? We saw images that were spread on international networks today, but what I've understood based on the information I obtained today in discussions I had with my counterparts is that these images, well, at the time we're speaking right now, Iranian authorities have now secured the site. So it is now secure, and I think we have to do everything in our power to use best practices because we know the first hours of an event, it's important to site in question be secured, and with the international investigation and the requests that were made, what I've understood is that Iran has now secured the site, and some of the elements may be displaced to reproduce what happened, what could have happened, and look at the evidence we'll be able to find on the site.
You're going to be the last one.
Okay, Minister, I just want to pick up on that point. You say the Iranians have apparently secured the crash site, but you said you want an investigation of transparency and accountability that brings closure, but we have seen that most, if not all of the debris has been removed before we're even into the country, that scavengers and a bulldozer have been on that site, but now you say it's been secured. So given what you see...
Let me be clear, they've been secured since we... So the authorities that were on the ground, in light of what you just said, and we understand that some of these debris have been moved to a hangar at the airport to reconstruct the scene. That's my understanding. And as I told you, we don't have boots on the ground, so we work with assessments and what we receive. So what we understand is that some of that has been moved to hangar, what remains on the location, based on what you saw and what we saw, the team that is on the ground, so I would say the people of the representative in particular of Ukraine and others have called on the Iranian to make sure that following what you just described, that there would be police officers to preserve and to prevent exactly what you just said.
Okay, you kind of jumped in before I got to my question. So no, it's okay. But I guess what I wanted to ask is that given that sequence of events and what we know, how much confidence do you have that the integrity of this investigation is intact and that Canadians can have confidence in its conclusions based on what appears to be a compromised site?
Well, our experts will be able to tell. You know, that's why I say we have demanded as a international coordination and response group for Iran to use best practices. There are very well-established best practices in the world when you have a crash site like that. We demand and obviously expect the Iranian government to follow that. The best way for us to be able to answer specifically to your question is when we're going to have our experts who are going to be able to go to this hangar, are going to be able to go to this crash site and identify and assess whether best practice was followed and what could be the conclusion following that. So that's why I always come back to the visas, because until and unless I can have, or we can have people on the ground, we have to rely on partners and we have to rely on information that we're getting to make sure that everything that could be done is done to protect the integrity of the investigation.
So given the absence of the visas right now, and given the public statements and reports coming out of Iran that they may announce the cause tomorrow, that they deny that a missile could have even been involved, what's your level of trust right now in the Iranians that they're doing this investigation properly to come to a proper conclusion?
Well, my wish is to have our specialists on the ground as quickly as possible, because the Transport Safety Board, we have these specialists who will be able to make that assessment. I would like to hear from them before we start speculating about what may happen and what are the consequences of what may have happened.
But do you trust them?
I would say that for the time being, I watch like you the facts. What I want to have is an expert assessment. As soon as we have people on the ground, we will be able to tell Canadians what we hear and be able to provide updates. And that's why the investigation is so crucial. And that's why by creating, I think, the International Coordination and Response Group, that's the best, I would say, at least it's one of the best things we could do to make sure that we speak with one voice, make sure that everyone comes together, we are coordinated. That group, the principals will have weekly calls, our officials will have daily calls on this so that we are able to provide all the information, pull that information, and pull in the same direction, which is the one, like the Prime Minister said, we want full accountability, we want answers to these questions, and the world is watching what the Iranian government is doing now.
All right. Thank you very much.
Merci tout le monde. Bonne soirée. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Allez-y.
Inaudible for the interpreter. Microphone, please. Would Canada like to have had notice? I'll repeat the question. Would Canada like to have had notice from the U.S. before the attack against General Soleimani? Of course, when you work in a coalition with your partners, we always work in coordination, and it's good to do so. The first thing we have to do to answer your question is how we can better protect men and women who are serving in Iraq. Well, any measures that can be taken to protect their health and safety of Canadians that are currently deployed in Iraq to help Iraqis are measures we support. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.